Thank you for being here. So, all of us here probably have it pretty good, right? We've been recognized in our careers, found innovative solutions to problems, and generally feel in control. However, I suspect that you're here today not only because of your accomplishments, but because you are seeking more. This is a room full of seekers, and seeking has led you to make incredible innovations in your industries, but seekers never stop seeking. And if you made time to hear some guy you've probably never seen before tell you about his experiences with psychedelics, well, something tells me you might still be seeking something. Maybe it's a way to ease anxiety, identify ways to bring more creative flow into your life, or confront fear. Or maybe it's to find a purpose, expand on a purpose, or find the tools to fulfill that purpose. Or maybe you already have all of that and you just want to feel connected to something bigger, or connect to giving back after having received so much. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm standing up here getting ready to tell you about my own journey as a seeker, my deepest, most personal inner quest. And actually, I've wondered it too, because I've always been very quiet, shy, not the most gregarious. As one friend put it when he was pitching me to a potential blind date, he said, "You probably won't find Harris dancing in his underwear at the nightclub." And that's never happened. But I've always been an observer, curious, analytical, full of questions, and even as a young boy, driven by fear. I was always shielding myself from fear, playing it safe and in protection mode. But my life has changed. That protective mode has been switched off. I'm still very curious, but now I don't always play it safe. It took me decades to reach this point in my life, a point at which I feel free to seek answers to some of my most profound questions, and free to talk about it in public. And that sense of freedom has empowered me in my own career, my personal life, and my entrepreneurial activities in ways that I never ever thought possible. So, how did this happen? I always knew that I wanted to be in journalism. I was 8 years old when I started a class newspaper in my middle school, and at 16, I was chasing around Guatemala City, covering press conferences, carrying tripods and television equipment for a CBS News crew that was in the country covering the political upheaval at the time. And that's when I first tasted tear gas, which was the first taste of many in my life. My path towards becoming a journalist was easy because I always knew what I wanted to do and always had an innate sense of what steps my career path would take. And I always knew where that career would lead me. After college and my master's degree at Columbia University School of Journalism in New York, I just knew I would end up at CNN, which in the late 1980s was the only place any aspiring international television correspondent wanted to be. So after I landed a freelance gig at CNN in Guatemala and getting a few of my reports on the air, I eventually got a full-time staff position at headquarters in Atlanta. And that put me on a path to discover 3 of the most important lessons of my life, which led me to fear less, create more, and empower my career and my personal life. So, lesson number 1. Don't always play it safe. I started out on the writer's desk, churning out author scripts, anchor scripts for various network shows. But after a couple of months of that, I was already so bored sitting in a studio in Atlanta. I longed to be out in the field, reporting from the ground. I pictured myself in far-flung corners of the earth, putting together compelling pieces of television journalism. This was 1992, and a little country called Haiti in the Caribbean was always in the news for political upheaval, hunger, and natural disasters. And I started agitating for assignments to Haiti, and I was such a pain about it that my boss finally relented and sent me to Port-au-Prince for my first ever international field assignment. The fashion has improved a bit. I was blown away by what I saw. There were dead bodies in the streets, voodoo ceremonies, angry mobs and angrier armed soldiers and massive street demonstrations, and the level of living conditions among the majority poor I had never seen, even after having grown up here in Guatemala. But I was thrilled to be there, and I was deeply impacted by what I was witnessing. I must have started archiving those images in the back of my mind because they would come back, not to haunt me, but to teach me valuable lessons. Being in those dangerous situations kept me in protective mode, a method of self-preservation that accompanied me for many years in my professional life. But looking back, I now realize it was not always to my advantage. As a journalist, I would always take the measures to ensure my safety first when reporting on a story. And the network would always hammer into me the idea that personal safety always had to be at the top of our minds. After all, a dead reporter can't report very much, no matter how good that story is. But at times, I felt that I was missing out on things and events because I was so focused on protection. I remember one time before I left my base in Mexico City for one of my first tours in Iraq, a friend of mine took me to visit a shaman, a spiritual healer, who conjured special protection for me. And I was well protected during my assignment, but I'm not sure it was because of the shaman. I think I've always lived under the influence of fear, of what others might think, of what might happen, of the unknown. And that leads me to my second lesson about fear. Fear is nothing but a lack of information. When I was growing up in Guatemala in the mid-1980s, there was a civil war going on and political violence was everywhere. I learned to live with the fear as one of the main drivers in my life. I saw my first dead body when I was 13 years old. I heard the maids in my house whispering about death squads terrorizing villages, and I frequently heard gunshots at night. So this young, aspiring reporter always asked questions about the violence and never ever got any answers. Some things were too dangerous to talk about. Fast forward to Afghanistan, the fall of 2001. 9/11 had just happened, and the war it sparked was a story that everybody wanted to be on. CNN offered me an assignment in Kabul to cover the war from the ground, and even though I was ecstatic about having the chance to be in the front seat while history unfolded, covering the biggest military conflict of the time alongside some of journalism's greatest, I was absolutely terrified of the danger I would face. I felt almost paralyzing fear when I was handed the assignment, partly because the head of international assignments at CNN asked me for a list of my kin, people who would be notified if I died, my survivors. And that's when it became real for me. At any rate, I took the assignment, I eventually boarded my flight to Moscow, made my way to Tajikistan, and drove to the border, the Afghan border. And that moment is when my fear dissipated completely. The moment I stepped foot in the battlefield. Why? Because I focused on the immediate, getting to where I had to go, doing the reporting I had to do, and getting my stories on the air. So I was able to tame that fear on my work assignments, but up to that point, it still was a detrimental factor in my life. And I wanted to stare it in the eyes. Years later, I would have a chance to do that, but it was in Afghanistan where I started to realize that fear can be easily controlled, even turned into a positive force. Years after Afghanistan and Iraq and the Congo and Southeast Asia and countless other dangerous assignments, I had an opportunity to gain even more insight into fear. And it was one of the most profound lessons of my life. It happened during the biggest reporting trip I have ever done, an exploration of my own subconscious mind. It was a controlled, therapeutic, psychedelic mushroom trip. And I confirmed what I had learned in Afghanistan, that fear is nothing more than a lack of information. That when you fill that vacuum with data, the fear dissipates. Fear is caused by conjecture, by imagining scenarios. We create our own self-limitations. How? We make up stories about how we will react to situations we don't want or like. We imagine things are harmful to us before we have the true facts at hand. But when you have data, information, real facts, there's no room for fear. I learned fear had made me cool and aloof, distant in my protective mode, and that was not allowing me to live life fully and celebrate all of its intensity. Fear leads to guilt, which leads to more fear, which leads to more guilt, and that's just not a good, fun way to live. Fear is like having on blinders. They prevent you from seeing the full picture. and you stop creating or building or growing. And this leads me to my third lesson. Lesson 3, how do we get into creative flow? The truth is, the answers are always at hand. After 20 years at CNN, I was burnt out and realized I had lost my creative drive. I had returned to live in Guatemala in 2013, and it looked like I was doing quite well. I was freelancing, I was enjoying free time and flexibility to pursue other projects. But while I was reporting and producing and writing as usual, I was doing it on autopilot. I wasn't feeling creative at all, and much less motivated about creating any new work. For years, friends and family had been pushing me to write a book detailing my experiences on the road, but whenever I would sit down to start writing, I would give up without completing even the first paragraph. The summer of 2019, I was on an extended stay in Madrid. I love that city, but I was absolutely miserable. I felt disconnected, disoriented, and I felt for the first time in my life that there was no clear path ahead for me. After leaving CNN, I had no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I hated the intensely active social life that I found myself trapped in. I felt like I had a desperate need to find more meaning in my life, and I was disappointed that I wasn't surrounded by the people who shared or supported me in that quest. I had been reading a lot about the controlled use of small amounts of psychedelics, as I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but it's known as microdosing. I read that it was used by people in Silicon Valley who were looking for brain hacks to improve their creativity and performance. And I read how scientists in the UK and Israel in particular were using controlled psychedelic experiences to help people overcome trauma, or in the case of Israel, to help soldiers overcome PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Something led me one morning in Madrid to Google psychedelic therapy retreats, and that led me to the synthesis retreats in Amsterdam, where eventually my own psychedelic journey would take place. I was embodying my lesson 3. The answers are always at hand. So I signed up for a 3-day retreat, immediately started researching articles and reading as much as I could about psychedelics, and I set the intentions that I wanted to explore during my psychedelic dive. In my reading, particularly Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind with Psychedelics, which is also a Netflix series now, I learned about the effects of a single properly administered dose of a psychedelic substance. When guided by professionals and in the proper setting, and of course with proper follow-up, this experience can be equal to about 15 years of traditional psychotherapy. I felt like I had no major psychological issues to address, but underneath that evident well-being, I did feel a deep emptiness. I had a desperate need for more meaning, to understand the forces that drive our behavior in our societies, to go beyond the immediate material, the toys and the parties and the beautiful homes, and most importantly, I needed to understand why I felt the need to embark upon this quest. I read that a psychedelic substance can allow you to observe moments in your life in their absolute essence, with no baggage, no preconceptions, and no judgment. And I instinctively knew that this experience would have the potential to radically change my life for the better. So I set intentions for my psychedelic journey, and I decided to explore 3 aspects of my life: fear, creativity, and anxiety, and I just dove right in. The afternoon of the trip, after a full day of workshops and meditation and breathing exercises led by synthesis facilitators, I ceremoniously took my cup of mushroom tea and I lay down on a mat in a beautifully lit, warm, and cozy room. And after about 45 minutes, it was like a virtual reality experience, but without the goggles. I found myself floating in a beautiful space filled with color and geometric shapes until I saw below me the entrance to a dark cavern. Smoke poured out of it. You could see flames there, and I could actually smell sulfur. I could perceive the smell of sulfur. And I knew it was a place of death and evil, and I knew that this was my chance to once again face fear and explore its impact on me. I floated down to the cavern and entered it, and as I stood on the floor, I saw the huge skeletons of dinosaurs, and I just stood there for a while, my senses on full alert. But I was strangely calm. My intense curiosity about the place overwhelmed any desire to flee the place. And as I stood there and faced hell, what I thought I feared the most, a deep sense of calm and clarity just washed over me. On a very deep level, I had faced fear again, and once and for all conquered it with information and with knowledge and insight. So now that I've banished all the fear in my life forever, I wish. The scene changed, and I found myself in a luminous, beautiful space that was filled with white light and the playful sound of children's songs in the air, and these huge, colorful gummy bears showed up, and they took my hand and encircled me, and we started dancing and jumping in the air, and it was a moment of pure, innocent joy, just childlike joy. And the bears started whispering in my ear. They incessantly chanted a single word, calliope, calliope. The sound was so intense and the words so clear, I actually wrote it down in a small notebook that I kept by my side. And the next morning, after I had come out of my trip, I Googled calliope and discovered she was the muse, the goddess of creativity in ancient Greece. And at that moment, I understood that the muse lives within me, that whenever I need to unblock creative flow, all I have to do is recognize that the power to create is already within, and I just need to get out of its way and let it flow. As the afternoon wore on and I continued to trip, at one point I looked out the window and found an ancient old oak tree that was staring right at me. She started swaying in the wind, and as I stared back, she started withering and growing very old right before my eyes. Her leaves fell off, she shrunk and turned brown, becoming a dry husk of bark silhouetted against the beautiful afternoon sunlight. And as I continued to stare, all of a sudden, new green leaves started sprouting on the tree, and it grew in size, and just as quickly as it had died, it sprung back to life, becoming strong and lush and green and vibrant. And this cycle continued on and off for quite some time. The tree would come to life and then return to life and die again. And I understood then that life is a cycle, that everything has a beginning and an end, but that all ends lead to new beginnings. My anxiety vanished because I was filled with a deep, exhilarating sense of hope, of joy, of excitement, because I knew at an almost visceral level that life truly is nothing more than an endless string of possibilities. After I returned home from Amsterdam, I started writing my memoir and published it all over Latin America 8 months later. So. Yeah. I have never been happier than I am today. My psychedelic experience altered the course of my life in the most profound way possible. I confronted my demons and came face to face with the forces of life, of love, and connection with deep wisdom. And I realize and now celebrate that we are all truly part of an intricate, perfect system that works if we just let it work. These lessons that showed up during my psychedelic trip also showed up as I was writing my book. As I revisited many experiences around the world covering death and tragedy and injustice, I found that those experiences also offered exciting lessons about life and its meaning. I had to relive those moments, sometimes decades later, but with a new set of filters, a new sense of wonder that I still try to apply today. And that sense of wonder, curiosity, and optimism, I believe it's at the essence of what drives all of us, entrepreneurs, visionaries, disruptors who are working to find new ways to improve human existence. The world of psychedelic therapy is enjoying a renaissance. There are serious academic and scientific studies underway on the potential benefits that these magical substances can bring, and I would encourage you to learn more about them. Now, I'm not here to push drugs. I'm not an illegal drug user, and I have only explored psychedelics under the controlled and respectful conditions that I've described. But I would not be doing justice to that experience and the profound effects it had on me if I did not share it with others. There are facilities around the world that are doing groundbreaking, exciting work in the field of psychedelic therapy. There's Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, the Imperial College of Medicine at Oxford, the Safra Brain Research Center at the University of Haifa. And as more of this research is made public, psychedelic therapy moves closer to the mainstream. And this is an incredible opportunity to bring about personal change and growth for many, many people. And that can only be good for all of us. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Sí, gracias. Sí, si quieren, sí. Muchas gracias. Gracias. Tenemos unos minutos, si alguien tiene preguntas o quieren comentar o debatir algo. Any questions or comments? ¿No?
Las terapias, cada cuánto se hacen o con qué tanto. Oh, sorry. But how often do you do the therapies, or it's recommended?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert, so don't take my word as the absolute truth. I think it's a very personal experience. In my case, I did it once, and I had never done anything like that before, and I did what they call a hero's dose, which many of you probably know, which is it's like a kick in the ass. So it's big. It's big, and it just leads you to a whole other dimension. And I was able to as I said, solve specific questions that I had. I wouldn't have done it the next day. There are people who do like series. I did it once, and I think that when I have something else I need to deal with that is big, I'll probably do it again. But there's no prescription. What the experience did do was it gave me tools to access this state of mind, which can be accessed by meditation, by yoga, by many other practices. For me, it was like a fast track VIP, fast lane ticket to that space. But now that I know what's there and what the possibilities are, I try to apply meditation and at least find a space where I can apply these tools to think things that I need to think. Anybody else? Please.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Yo lo que quería es agradecer el valor que tienes de pararte acá a hablar de tu experiencia, porque ayudas a muchas personas como yo que se han atrevido a tomar este camino de la presencia, de la conciencia y el amor, a sentirse apoyados, y tal vez así puedes usar tu plataforma para mostrarle al mundo de que pues, no somos un adicto más, sino en realidad tenemos otra manera de vivir, y que por eso puedan empezar a respetar nuestra manera de vivir. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, sí. Y gracias a Janma y el Volcano Summit por permitir este espacio. Buena onda. ¿Alguien más? Sí.
Gracias. También yo soy muy agradecida por tu historia, porque realmente creo que somos humanos y todos tenemos un punto en nuestra vida en donde sufrimos de ansiedad y estrés por X o Y razón, y pues en algunos momentos de nuestra vida probablemente hemos acudido a otro tipo de químicos, ¿verdad? Y esto es como una alternativa que pues no es negar que la medicina funciona, ¿verdad? Pero nos da como un respiro a que existe otra opción que sea tal vez un poquito más, no sé si sana es la palabra, pero no caer en la adicción de muchos químicos que pues mucha gente no logra salir. Así que gracias y por iluminarnos en este tema.
Muchas gracias, sí. Gracias. Y si algo aprendí yo de esto es como que aprender en gratitud. Yo después de hacer lo de los hongos, tuve la oportunidad de hacer una sesión con ayahuasca, que también fue como muy terapéutica, muy profunda. Y el haber hecho la experiencia en Ámsterdam como que me preparó el camino. Pues aquí hay gente que sabe a dónde fuimos. Y para mí lo que fue la experiencia con ayahuasca fue nadar en un mar de gratitud absoluta. O sea, fue como tan refrescante y tan luminoso el espacio que se creó por vivir en gratitud. Y como que aprendí a agradecerle a la naturaleza el regalo que da, el regalo que nos ha dado y la maravillosa herramienta que nos dio para aplicarlo para el bien, para el desarrollo personal, para el desarrollo del bien común, que a la larga, pues por eso estamos todos aquí, ¿verdad? Así que... ¿Alguien más? Jana.
Thank you, Harris. We had a coffee almost 3 months ago,
More or less.
4.
More or less.
And I loved when he called me and told me, hey, can I talk about this? And I'm like, for sure. This is an open space that you can talk whatever you want and you can enlighten people. So thank you for that, because it takes courage to do that. It's not so easy. Being a great leader and doing that is not so easy, to open your heart from that perspective, because it's very personal process. And for sure, psychedelics also changed my life. So thank you for that, Harris.
Thank you. Thank you. Muchas gracias. Pues thank you very much. And if there's no other questions, I'm around all afternoon so we can chat. And thank you for being here and for this. Thank you.